Around 12,000 years ago, the world began to thaw. From this melt emerged the first humans. These primitive beings were nomadic hunter-gatherers who roamed the land following its patterns of resource. They may have stopped for periods of time, but only as long as the land would allow, and they never lived their entire life in one place. Although after a few hundred years of nomadic foraging, a large drought cut off the early people's resource. Seasonal plants dried up, and herds of animals died off in droves. Humans, for the first time, were forced to stay in one spot. With this new way of living came new methods for gaining nourishment. Instead of foraging every day for their meals, for the first time in history, humans would grow them. They began by bringing useful crops in closer to their settlements and growing them each year and harvesting the useful parts for food. This was the beginning of farming and of the Neolithic Revolution. Settlements began forming around the globe as people could no longer afford to keep moving. While all settlements were formed around the same time, they were not all created equal. The peoples of Papua New Guinea were forced to rely their civilization on taro, a crop which required a lot of work to plant and harvest. Taro had to be planted root by root and couldn't last very long once picked in the hot, humid climate of New Guinea. In contrast, the people of the Fertile Crescent in the Middle East had cereal grains available to them which they could easily harvest and easier plant. With the flick of the wrist, early farmers in the Middle East could spread food security. They could also store the crops for long periods of time because they could last in the dry climate of the Middle East. This is the beginning of what is called geographic luck. This principle is responsible for the world being separated how it is today into haves and have-nots. This is what has caused the Middle Eastern farmers to be able to grow large amounts of food easily, while the people of Papua New Guinea still struggled to get enough food to survive and suffered from protein deficiencies. Geographic luck is what has shaped the world into how we recognize it today. The climate of the Middle East was also prime for keeping the cereal grains that were grown there preserved. The early farmers of the Middle East could now keep their crops for long after they had been harvested. This allowed for a food surplus in the Middle East. With this food surplus, this allows for less and less people to devote their days to farming. Instead of working all day to grow food, people of the Middle East began experimenting with new technologies. Suddenly, what was once simple homes turned into more complex houses and soon civilizations. In the early settlement of Dra, in the Jordan Valley near the Dead Sea, radiocarbon dating tells us that it only took 100 years for humans to develop plaster that lined the inside of their homes. But turning limestone into plaster wasn't the only advancement of the time. The mastery of fire was also figured out around the same time. With the mastery of fire came smelting. Smelting ore was used to create more advanced tools. What was once made out of rock was now replaced with sharpened and hardened metals. Stone tools were replaced by metal axes, knives, and spears. Iron tools tore through the farmland, making it even easier for the people of the Middle East to farm. By experimenting in their free time, the early farmers of the Fertile Crescent had launched humans into the Bronze Age. The people of Papua New Guinea, on the other hand, had no free time. Their days were spent scavenging for what food they could find, the labor-intensive act of farming taro, or chopping down and breaking apart sago trees. This devotion of time fully to farming is what halted the progress in the New Guinean technology. While the farmers of the Middle East were using metal tools and working more effectively than they ever had before, the people of New Guinea were still using the same stone tools that they had for hundreds of years. The free time for Middle Eastern farmers had also allowed them to begin domesticating animals. The domestication of animals was a giant leap forward in farming technology, and increased the productivity even more. Meat was now plentiful all year round. Foods like milk and cheeses diversified menus, and better clothes could now be made from the furs of goat and sheep. Transportation was now easier thanks to animals like horses and camels. Farms could now swap animal labor for human labor. This led to even more free time and even more inventions. A sharp contrast to the people of Papua New Guinea. They had only domesticated the pig, which was useful only for its meat, and its destructive habits could usually be more harmful than beneficial. Again, thanks to bad geographic luck, the people of Papua New Guinea had fallen behind in the race to advance. The people of the Middle East were farming themselves into what was sure to be a utopia in the desert. That was until, of course, they ran themselves out of resources. Soon, all of the trees, which were scarce to begin with, were cut down. No longer could the Fertile Crescent support a civilization. What was once the farming jewel of the world had now lost its glow. Farmers were forced to spread elsewhere on the globe to begin all over again. They spread east and west along the lines of latitude which they had begun on. This ensured that the climate was relatively the same, but more importantly, the length of the day was what they were used to. They spread out east and west, bringing their crops with them, and slowly but surely they did move north and south. Soon the people who had begun as the wheat farmers of the Middle East were now the dairy-loving farmers of Europe, or the harsh Norsemen of modern-day Iceland. But eventually, they would all become the people of the New World. The Columbian Exchange brought many new foods back to Europe. Never before had an Irishman tasted a potato before the Columbian Exchange, or had an Italian chef constructed a sauce that consisted of tomatoes. Tobacco was never smoked in Europe before the Columbian Exchange, but more importantly than what was brought back was what that had been found, and what was found was land, and lots of it. European explorers began pouring into the New World and establishing settlements. They came across natives who had already begun farming this undiscovered land. Crops like corn, squash, and pumpkins were growing in the New England countryside when the Europeans arrived. Quickly, the forests were cut down, the fields were burned, and sections were fenced off. Cows began to trample the lush hills and stomp them until only dirt remained. This was a trend for the newly settling Europeans. Come in, fence things off, and do what you please with what's in your section of the fence. The Europeans moved in and settled their cattle and other animals in the new land. This possessive mentality of the Europeans was the complete opposite of the natives who had been living there previous. The natives farmed small sections of the land and had no domesticated animals. This I find interesting. The Europeans had such an advanced civilization from the natives, but they could never truly support it. They always needed more land, more animals, and more people. How ironic it is that the Europeans were advancing so quickly and becoming so efficient that they could never support themselves, while on the other hand, the natives, who lived a similar lifestyle, were perfectly sustainable and could continue on unaided for years. Soon the settlers of early America began to head westward. Encouraged on by government propaganda, would-be farmers began moving west in large numbers. Soon, simple prairies were transformed into vast farmlands. The staple crops of the Middle East, wheat and barley, also flourished in the American Midwest. These foods would go on to power the American Industrial Revolution. During this time period, America began to grow and progress even more rapidly than before. Mills, factories, and shops lined the streets. Mill cities became common in what were once quiet towns. In this period and the years following, America saw a large increase in its immigrant population. This increase, as well as an increase in non-immigrant population, gave an even higher demand for food, and the American Midwest would grow even denser with farms. This pattern of growth continued on, and with the increases in farm technology and the new addition of petroleum-powered farming equipment, was even more efficient than ever. But it wasn't until after World War II that farming reached its full potential. By the mid-1940s, World War II was over, but it had still left a lot of its remnants behind, one of which was bombs. A large amount of ammonium nitrate was left over from the process of making explosives, although ammonium nitrate could be used as a fertilizer. The federal government was going to spray the nation's forests to boost the timber industry, but instead they decided to dust the country's farmland with it, instead making farming even more productive. In doing so, they began what is the common agricultural task of spraying crops with artificial fertilizer. This began to increase crop yields by a tremendous amount, and food could be grown even more easier now. Eventually, government subsidies drove down the price of food, and they began giving out more financial assistance directly to those who needed it. This came in the form of food stamps, EBT, and the SNAP program. This was the government's role in the allocation of food, assuring that food is affordable for everyone and will grow. The increase in food amounts has come at a price, though. Today, many natural environments have been or are being destroyed by the modern food system. The city of Des Moines can't drink water from the nearby rivers in spring because of chemical runoff from nearby farms. Giant feedlots have sprung up in the Midwest, and with the planet's population growth rate at an all-time high, science now needs to be brought into the food system. Genetically modified crops now line the fields of America's heartland. Food has now turned into a globalized system of growing, transporting, and selling. Large chains have taken advantage of this abundance of cheap food, and now fast food restaurants fill our street corners. What started out as early humans farming grains in the Middle East has now turned into an intricate system of supply and demand. The Neolithic Revolution may have begun thousands of years ago, but it still continues on today.